Everybody good to go? All right, we're going to get started. Good evening and welcome to the Livonia Schools regular board meeting of December 16th, 2024. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonifield? We might not be able to.
One mic at a time. Mrs. Bonifield is here. Here. Here.
She's fixing it.
Mrs. Bonifield?
Are we okay? You're good.
Okay, here we go.
Here. Mrs. Burton?
Here.
Mrs. Frank?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mrs. Acosta is here. President Bradford?
Here, and we have a quorum. Mrs. Bonifield, could you lead us in the pledge, please?
I would love to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good evening. A message I'd like to send from Superintendent Oquist. She's very sorry that she's unable to be here with us tonight at the meeting, especially because we have a honoree, Mrs. Bonifield. We want to honor her for her amazing service this evening. She does have a family member who is ill this evening. In her place tonight, we're happy to have Mr. Phil Francis, the Assistant Superintendent of District Services, here to assist us. If you'd like to follow along with tonight's meeting and you're joining us in person, you can go out the doors and to the left and find a copy of tonight's agenda on the table. If you are joining us from home, you can go to our LPS website at www.livoniapublicschools.org, click on the school board tab, and go down to board meeting information, and there you'll find the meeting agenda for this evening. If you are here this evening and you wish to speak at audience communications, please make sure you fill out a blue slip. Those are also located to the left of the doors. Tonight's meeting is a regular meeting or a voting meeting. If you've tuned in to watch this meeting, you may notice that there's not a lot of discussion happening on these items. That's because we have seen and discussed these items multiple times prior to this meeting, mainly at our study sessions and our committee of the whole meetings. If you wish to hear more regarding these items, we ask that you go back and watch the committee of the whole meeting. There you will find much richer discussion and answers to many questions. Our committee of the whole meetings are recorded and they can be found on our website and via YouTube. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and move on to item 3, communications. And we're going to go ahead and start out with the district update from our assistant superintendent this evening, Mr. Phil Francis. Thank you for being here tonight, Phil.
Thank you very much, President Bradford. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm excited to go through our update. Going through it earlier today, there's some wonderful pictures, so much happening recently in the district, and quite a bit upcoming too. So I'll just jump in, and we'll get started. Our first slide that you see here is Mrs. Trombley's humanities class at Churchill High School. They are had brought a Greek orders architecture lesson to life. They'd used Play-Doh. I don't know how, this is a senior class, don't know the last time they jumped in and played with Play-Doh, but you can see they did a heck of a job bringing the learning to life. I know the humanities class at Churchill is a favorite for seniors to get their ELA credit for 12th grade, and that seems to be a popular item. Moving on, we've got the kindergartners at Nigiero. So here's what they're doing. They are practicing their letters with shaving cream on the desk table. Yes, I hope that Mr. Wilson, the building supervisor, was absent this day and did not see this occurring. But you can see they're having a good time using kinesthetic, using their body to also learn their letters. We have up next the Coolidge Elementary first graders. They are in Mrs. Shocker's class, and they're practicing their math with their grid puzzles. You can see how intensely they are looking and working on that left picture, and the rest of them, except the cutie in the middle, who is like, what is happening right now? But they are really engaged in this lesson. We have the Rosedale Elementary fourth graders doing a gallery walk. So they were learning about monster plants. And I will tell you that monster plants are known as the species Montessera delicioso. And I'm not making that up. They are monster plants that are native in the tropical areas and forests of southern Mexico down to Panama. Thank you, Wikipedia, earlier today for that. But it is also known as fruit salad trees because they are very large plants that produce some fruits. So they were learning, and I got to learn a little bit because of the Rosedale Elementary fourth graders. At Cooper Elementary, we have these students who are learning about the constellations, and they created posters showing their work. And I'm sure that the Cooper students will continue to reach for the stars as they continue to learn. Was that too much?
Very good.
Next, we have Mrs. Polinsky's full house of students at Frost getting some intervention time. They were using their mascot time, which is known as Falcon time, specifically at Frost, for her to work with them on some different strategies and using the iReady study plans through IXL, and really what we would hope to be seeing in our classrooms and students engaged in getting that little bit of a double dip on their learning. This next one just happened recently, and it's a fan favorite in this building, at least for me, and I know for all the others that work here. When the Franklin Bell Canto Choir comes, everybody is just waiting on them. It's really fantastic, and Mr. Schuster is the new director of the Franklin Bell Canto Choir, and they sounded phenomenal. It was beautiful, and it's always nice to have them at that Christmas time giving us some of those carols. We greatly appreciate them for coming by. They did a little tour around the district as well and went to some elementaries in the Franklin Triad. We have the Merry and Bright Parade in Livonia, well attended. You'll see all kinds of students in these next few pictures. We had the LPS Foundation and the Stevenson Marching Band in these first pictures participating in it. And in the next set, we have the Livonia Knights Hockey and the Emerson Middle School folks and Livonia Palm all marching, not so much marching on the left side there, but they were all participating in the parade. On our next slide, we've got the Franklin Marching Band and the Stevenson cheerleaders marching in the parade. And following that up with a nice shot of the Stevenson hockey crew. And we've got Livonia Unified Girls Hockey and Elite Palm doing some work over at the parade. We have now, moving on for the musical portion here, Frost and Churchill band and orchestra got together at Churchill's PAC last week and performed. Over 300 musicians, students, phenomenal. Just bringing them all together, loving that connection between the middle school and the high school, having the programs being synergized together and working together, playing together. It's really a sight to see. Sticking with the musical theme, we've got the Kappa Vocal Jazz Ensemble concert for Livonia Rotary. They had a holiday luncheon, I believe this was last week, and the crew came in and sang for them and gave a little performance. And having been to one of the Rotary lunches in the past, they really do enjoy having this type of, seeing the students, having that season, the holiday cheer with the musicals, etc. So it was a really nice moment for everybody. And I see some familiar faces on that right side of those pictures here. So I see Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Oquist and several others. Moving on to the giving season, we have students at Churchill. It's an amazing tradition at Churchill. As you well know, I started off my career in Livonia Public Schools teaching at Churchill High School. This has always been a very big deal to the Churchill students to try to reach their goal, to try to break their goal, and they did beat their goal of the 15,425 cans. That would lay out estimating to be about 9,394 meals, or the total of 12,522 pounds of food that was donated by the Churchill students. So that's amazing, amazing tradition, amazing job, well done. Over at Franklin, not to be outdone, the high school baseball program donated toys at Grant Elementary. They were very generous, and it's a great connection within the Franklin Triad, having the high schoolers go down to the K4, and it's exciting for the elementary students when those high schoolers, when the big kids come and hang out with them. So very, very nice. And on the next one, we move on to Stevenson's softball program. Big thanks to them for getting out at the Nights of Lights at Greenmead. The weather was not exactly ideal, but they braved it, and they helped out quite a bit. So thank you to the Churchill, the Stevenson, and the Franklin students for all pitching in their own ways. Continuing with the theme, we've got the Livonia United Girls Hockey. They generously gave their time to help out the Salvation Army. They were at a couple of Kroger's in Livonia. And moving on, we have Stevenson High School softball. They made blankets for hospitalized children for the SHS Fleece and Thank You event. That's what a great, just making something for students in need. What a wonderful opportunity for them. And we appreciate all of those students who pitched in. Next slide here, you're seeing the picture of a very special guest. His name is Peter Grunwald, and he donated his time to coach up the Frost flute players. He periodically comes in. He's a professional flutist in the Metro Detroit area. He's known around Southeast Michigan, and he shows up and works with our Frost students with the flute. Isn't that great? We're going to move on to the community portion. I don't know what to say about this. We have 2 new Mustangs at LCTC Auto Shop, and those were generously donated by Bill Brown Ford. They did have a flooding issue, so they couldn't sell them. So they thought, instead of just getting rid of them, they sent them over to LCTC. It's really a good opportunity for the students to work on something like that. Mr. E2 and I were at LCTC last week, and while we were there talking to construction trades teacher, Mr. Martin, he specifically talked about how the auto students are excited about the Mustangs. We keep those locked inside the auto garage at all times, so nobody gets at them. But it's a really but when I worked at the Career Center, you didn't get, we had old time cars that weren't modern, and students were learning and working on them, but it's nice to have an updated vehicle with current technology for them to work on and tinker around with. So very great. So many kudos to all. Greatly appreciated. Next, we have some board members taking the oath of office. We have Crystal Frank, Karen Bradford, and Madeline Acosta, who are sitting to my left right now, all being reelected. And of course, we have the newest member, Dave McFarland, who is also being sworn in. So congratulations and kudos to all 4 of you on your win, on your reelection or initial election. We're very excited to be going into the next 2025 year and having this board together. We have the Stevenson Gymnastics. What an amazing showing. They went to Holt Invitational on December 7th, and they came out as the runner-up, which is really a great accomplishment. I mean, there's a lot of competition in our leagues and in the metro area, so kudos to them. Good job, ladies. We have an all-state swimmer, folks, over at Churchill High School. Sadie Yesler is all-state swimmer, and you can see that she was just named this by MHSAA. So congratulations to her. That is no small task, becoming an all-state in any event or any sport. So huge congratulations to her. Sticking with the athletics theme, we've got the Franklin Wrestlers, who are our city champs. Congratulations to them. You can see they're quite excited in the photos that we have. Big crew wrestling team, and they are city champs. Churchill, this is an interesting one. Have you heard of the Clash of the Conways? No. Clash of the Conways is the athletic administrator at Churchill is Mr. Casey Conway, and the superintendent in Gibraltar is his wife. So this is the Clash of the Conways, and Churchill hosted the boys and girls basketball team and were victorious. So the host came and pulled it out. So that's a fun little, yeah. So we have some new administrators that I believe I missed this last week, which was disappointing for me. But we did see, we have Mr. Joe Shivey, who is going to be the new assistant principal at Riley. And he comes to us from South Lyon. So welcome, Joe Shivey. And we're very excited for our very own Larissa Burke, who is now the principal over at Webster Elementary. So congratulations to both of them. I know we had that celebration last week. So I'm taking my moment to say welcome and congrats. What can you say with the LPS Education Foundation except thank you? I mean, always with the grants, they do such good work. They issued out $50,000 in classroom grants to staff. These are things that go above and beyond what the district normally provides, all the standard items in the classroom. These are for those supplemental extras for the students. And we, again, just a million thank yous to the foundation. They always take care of our staff and help us out. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And in vocational news, we've got congratulations going out to Mikola Harbis, a senior at Stevenson, via LCTC in the game design course at the Career Center. Mikola won, or received, I should say, the Rotary Award for Vocational Excellence from the Livonia Rotary. So congratulations. You can see the photo here. Mr. E2, second to the right, principal. Next to Mr. E2 is Lindsay Gray, and all the way to the left is the teacher, Melinda. So I'm blanking. Melinda Bush. Apologies, I blacked out for a second there. So very nice. Congratulations, Mikola. And speaking of All-State, we have an All-State middle school orchestra player. I didn't honestly even know that was a thing. So, wow, really, really amazing. So, congratulations to the Frost violinist Emma Howie for being selected for the Michigan School Band and Orchestra Association Middle School All-State Orchestra. That's amazing. You can see from the photo and what's written next to it, there's only 156 middle school violinists across the entire state that are selected for this. So this is very impressive. Congratulations to her. And I think we've got some upcoming reminders for events. We've got the Dollars for Scholars with the LPS Education Foundation. This is going to be Thursday, January 30th at St. Mary's Cultural and Banquet Center. And the keynote speaker is Maria Dismandi. She's a former teacher. I looked her up. She is a former teacher and now an author and speaker. And she actually writes about and speaks about helping to teach kids about having character, having good character. And this is such a strong tie to our character, our community with character in LPS. So I look forward to seeing her and listening to her speak at the event. Additionally, we have the Kappa Arts Camp. Looks like the Kappa Camp will be having their annual arts camp day on Saturday, January 11th. This is for 3rd and 8th grade students interested.
3rd through 8th grade.
Yeah, 3rd through 8th grade students. Did I say and? Apologies, thank you, good catch. For 3rd through 8th grade students interested in acting, dancing, or singing. So you can see the flyer here, it's $25. You'll get t-shirt, snack, pizza, water, and you're gonna have a showcase performance with friends and family. So check that out if you're interested in the Kappa program in the future, or if you're just at all interested in acting or dancing or singing. And finally, but absolutely not least, the chili cook-off is coming back, folks. January 20th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Franklin High School. Mark your calendar, $5 admission, and it's chilly time. It'll be cold in January. It'll be the perfect time for that. So that's our update for today's meeting, and we had quite a bit you can see and some excellent pictures. I want to thank Mrs. Stacy Jenkins, who could not be here. She put together this, all the pictures. She goes out. I don't know how she's everywhere.
Yes.
Somehow she splits herself up.
She's
and
everywhere.
gets to all these places.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate her putting that together. And I appreciate her setting that up. And it makes it easy for me to be able to run through it and give everybody else the update.
Wow, that was excellent, Mr.
Beautiful.
Francis.
Thank you very much.
Job well done on the update. Thank you so much. There's so much going on, and that's just a small snippet, really, of what goes on a daily basis here in the district and across Livonia here. So, all right, we're going to move on to item, this is one of my happiest and saddest at the same time, recognition, but, yes.
Can I just make a correction? The chili cook-off is actually on January 18th. I think it said the 20th.
Oh, thank you for the correction,
Thank you.
Mrs.
The flyer
Jarvis.
that's on here does say the 20th. If you look at the picture of the flyer, is that a mistaken flyer?
Well, that would be a Monday.
Okay,
Okay, we'll figure it out.
Okay.
we'll get it figured out, but stay tuned for that, but mark your calendars. We'll double check it. All right, we're going to move on to item 3B, and this is the recognition of Tammy Bonifield, Board Trustee. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mr. Johnson,
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the attached resolution as an expression of gratitude to Tammy Bonifield for her 12 years of service on the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education.
Support.
oh, overwhelming support. All right, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the recognition of Tammy Bonifield for Board Trustee. And I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Keats.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I have the distinct pleasure of kicking off our recognition this evening, and we are all so excited. We're a little bit sad because we will miss you so much, Tammy. So I am going to save all of the glowing words for your colleagues, for your friends that are sitting beside you here, but at this time I'd like to invite Mrs. Bradford and Mrs. Bonifield up to the podium so we can honor you, the woman who has spent over a decade of Monday nights in this very room serving the community and serving the students of Livonia Public Schools. So Mrs. Bradford and Mrs. Bonifield, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Keats. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read the resolution for this evening for my dear friend. Okay, Livonia Public Schools, Livonia, Michigan, December 16th, 2024, resolution. Whereas the trustees of the Board of Education are committed to recognizing and promoting excellence in education, leadership, and community service within the Livonia Public Schools District. And whereas Tammy Bonifield's service has been marked by a spirit of collaboration, a tireless commitment to enhancing the educational experience for every student, and a deep sense of responsibility to the future of Livonia Public Schools. Whereas Tammy Bonifield, trustee of the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education, has dedicated herself to serving the board, the district, and the broader Livonia community with outstanding distinction since her initial election in November 2012, and has been reelected in both 2016 and 2020, demonstrating continued trust and confidence from the community. And whereas throughout her tenure, including her role as past secretary of the board, Tammy Bonifield has carried out her responsibilities with unwavering integrity, a deep commitment to her duties, and a steadfast focus on fiscal stewardship, ensuring that the needs and interests of Livonia Public Schools students, staff, and families were always a top priority. Whereas Tammy Bonifield has further shown her dedication to the school district and the Livonia community through her longtime service and leadership in the Livonia AM Rotary Club, the Jackson Center PTA, the Hoover Elementary PTA, in addition to her son's Boy Scout troops and several district-wide committees throughout the years. And whereas Tammy Bonifield has contributed greatly to the school district and has achieved the Master Board Member distinction through the Michigan Association of School Boards by successfully completing several levels of MASB training courses, reflecting her commitment to professional development and effective governance. Her participation in MASB training courses has not only advanced her own knowledge and skills, but has also contributed to the Board of Education achieving honor board status. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the trustees of the Board of Education, on behalf of the entire Livonia Public Schools community, extend their deepest and most heartfelt gratitude to Tammy Bonifield for 12 years of service rendered to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education and for her dedication to the district's students, families, staff, and the community. We wish her continued success in all her future endeavors, and we honor her legacy of leadership and service. We have a couple gifts for you. One of them is the beautiful apple. This isn't the golden apple, but it's the crystal apple, and it's to honor your service to education. So that comes in a little, with a little holder.
Looks beautiful. Oh, thank you.
Has her name engraved on it, and
So
so
much. It's beautiful.
that's one of the gifts for you. And Mrs. Burton's going to come up right now because we have another gift.
Oh, my goodness.
And okay, and this is such a beautiful vase. It's the Livonia Public Schools emblem on it. It says Tammy Bonifield, and inscribed on it says, "Your wisdom, expertise, and dedication shaped our success. So grateful, your LPS family." All right, and I think what we'll do you want to say a few words? You don't have to. You can, but
yeah.
if you want to
Is it
say
okay?
something, and then we'll go back to the table because we want to say something.
Okay.
So I'm going to put this on your spot and
All right.
then come back to the table.
I just want to thank everybody. Over the years, we've had so many people. I started this journey probably about 23 years ago when I stood at this podium and asked the school district not to shut down the daycare program at Jackson Center. We were successful in doing so with the standing room only crowd, probably one of the biggest crowds we've ever had in the building. And through years of PTA and just a lot of stuff through the years, I've been able to serve the school district. My boys now are 26 and 24, so it's time for me to, as hard as it is, to step aside, and I am so pleased that Dave McFarland is taking over as the new trustee. He has small kids and obviously lives in the district. But anyway, so I think he's going to be a great addition to the board. And there's no worry, I will be moving on to other things. I've got my Rotary commitments, and there's always other stuff to get in trouble doing in the city. So I want to thank everyone. It's been a fantastic 12 years. We've gone. I don't know what to say. It's been a great family and a great group of people to work with over the years, and I appreciate it very much, and I love you all very much.
Aw.
Thank you.
We'll come back to the table, and then we're gonna talk about you too. I'm sure everybody's got some things to say here, so I'm gonna open it up to, I guess, Mr. Francis will start with. I think he wanted to start.
I'll lead it off, sure.
All right, he's gonna lead
Absolutely.
us off.
So just, Tammy, on behalf of the Superintendent Oquist and the entire cabinet, I just want to say, expressing really heartfelt gratitude for your service. This Board of Education for 12 years. When I started 10 years ago, because I actually was like, wait, she's been on this a while, because she's been on the whole time I've been on here. So the past 12 years, we greatly appreciate it. You've been an advocate for children, a thoughtful and wise voice in this board's discussions and deliberations, and a kind and generous friend to us all. So thank you, Tammy, for being there for the students, the staff, the community, for us, and for all of Livonia Public Schools. We really will miss you, and we wish you all the best.
Any other board members? Mrs. Burton.
I am sad that tonight has come. I know it needs to. I know it's healthy for a board to continue to turn over members and bring in new folks, new thoughts, younger kids. It's always a healthy thing. Tammy, when I look back over the years that you and I have served together, one of the things I admire most about you is not many of the votes that were easy and everyone's in agreement. But what I remember most and what I think made the most impact are the times that we had to have difficult discussions. And when we really functioned as in the true reason that a board is 7 people is so that we can bring 7 opinions and 7 experiences and 7 backgrounds to the table. And we can really talk about how decisions might impact one group of kids differently than another group of kids and differently than a third group of kids. I so appreciate the honest discussion that you were willing to bring to the table. And those are those are important discussions to have. It's easy when we're talking about something in which we're all in agreement. It's much more difficult, but much more important when we are having discussions about things that are truly difficult. When there isn't one great answer, but we have to simply make the best the best decision with what we have before us. And I so appreciate your passion and your honesty and your love for kids that you would bring to every single one of those discussions. You were never afraid to say, hey, wait a minute, we need to think about this angle or that angle. And it's why boards have 7 people, so that we can bring our experiences and so that we can all be strong enough to have those difficult discussions. Over the years, I've been blessed to learn to be able to call you my friend. When you first joined the board, you were a person that I knew served on the LPTSA Council and had been involved for so many years. And then I got to know you as my personal friend, and I will always treasure that. And I am so grateful that even though you won't be sitting at this table on Monday nights, we will still always carry that friendship from all the years that we've served together.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Anybody else? Oh, yeah, I know. Okay. Are you? All right, Mr. Johnson, we'll just go down the road here.
Go down the road. You know, Tammy, today I was trying to put my thoughts together on what I was going to say, and I think Colleen said it eloquently. It's 12 years, but it seems like it's been so much longer because of the wisdom that you brought to the board, your unending advocacy for students is unsurpassed. You brought that to the board table. You brought it to our discussions. You brought it into the classes that we took, the questions that you would ask. You really brought, as Colleen said, the discussions, the hard discussions that we needed to have. That's going to be sorely missed. And again, over that same amount of time, I didn't know you when we got on the board, but you have become a friend. And I'm going to miss your honey.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I guess I'll continue along the lines. Tammy and I actually met way back 24 years ago at Jackson Center, and we were both serving on the PTA, surprise. And I always admired, Tammy was on the kind of more the daycare side, I was more on the preschool side, and we have grown up together in PTA because we then traveled over to Hoover together, and so she and I have kind of served on many boards and committees together for so many years. And I can tell you, the word to describe Tammy is passionate about serving kids and doing the right thing. And you're always not afraid, like Colleen said, to be honest. And I love that about you, because the good discussions, the rich discussions, and I agree too. I'm totally going to miss you on my Monday nights with you at the board table, but we know you're just going to continue to do great things. And I too, along with Mr. Johnson, are going to miss your honey. But no.
You guys know where I live.
I know.
where your bees are, too.
We know where the bees are. We're going to find you. But thank you so much for your years of service and dedication to the district. And I just want to wish you all the best as you move on into a non-Monday night life. Good luck. You're going to be great.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've probably been the one that spent the least amount of time with you on the board, but I appreciate that you made being the board secretary look like such an easy job that I wanted to do it. And
Bingo.
so here I am.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you supporting me in this role and always bringing some deeper questions to the table that provokes deeper discussion. And I look forward to seeing you in the community, as we always see each other as we volunteer. So
Out and
good
about.
luck.
Great job. Great job. Okay, Mrs. Jarvis.
You know, it gets hard as you get
Yeah, I
closer
know.
to the end
I
because you've
know.
already said everything. I've had the privilege of working with Tammy for a long time, not since Jackson Center days, but at least since PTA Council and through Scouts as well.
Scouts, a lot of years of
A lot of
pushing.
years. And they've all been good. One of the things that I think is your strength is your ability to see different sides of things, to see every perspective. You don't want any side to not be considered when there's a discussion. And that makes us think more carefully and more critically. Very important. You've also been really willing, anytime I can pick up the phone and say, hey, Tammy, let me bounce something off of you, and you're great with that. I think that as we move forward, Dave's going to have big shoes to fill. Not that high heels, though, so that's good. And also, I think I know I will at least be saying to myself, what would Tammy do? Because that's a perspective that we will continue to need. And then on a selfish note, I'd like to remind you that the foundation meets on the second Thursday of the month.
Great. And Mrs. Frank.
Thank you. Tammy, it has been a pleasure. It has been a joy. I want to say thank you for your years of service. LPS is better because of you. I want to say thank you to Tristan and your brother. We are grateful that your family has shared you with us. And Brad, for many of the years that he shared you with us on Monday nights. And you have made us a better school district. Your thoughtful questions, your thoughtful analytics has brought a richer and a deeper discussion. But oftentimes we're having a discussion, you will say, especially about financial matters or different things, you will say, what about this aspect that we hadn't thought about? You make us a better school district. You make us a better board. So all 14,000 kids, I think, are better off because of Tammy Bonifield's service to our board. And so we're so grateful for that. And I know the 7 of us are grateful, but also all of our kids, all of our staff are better because of your service. So thank you, Tammy.
All right. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the recognition of Tammy Bonifield Board Trustee. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield.
Can I vote yes, so it's a 7-0 vote? Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, I say yes. That motion carries, and we wish you all the best, Tammy. Thank
he doesn't want to stay the whole time. Or is he?
Would you like a photo?
You want to come up and
Yes.
say
Tristan,
hi?
would you like to come up and have a photo with your mother? Thank you. Come on up. Tammy's son Tristan is here this evening. Yeah, should we take a 2-minute break? We're going to take a 2-minute break. We'll be right back. Thank you. All right, we are back. We're going to continue on with our regular board meeting of Livonia Public Schools for December 16th. Item 3C, written communications. I do not have any written communications. All right, we're moving on to item 3D, response to prior audience communications. None this evening. And we're going to go on to 3E, audience communications. I did have one blue slip, but I believe they have left this evening. So, is there anybody who wishes to speak this evening? Okay. All righty. Moving on to item 4, our consent agenda. May I have a motion, please? I guess we got to get ready here.
President Bradford,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of November 18th, 2024. 6F, approval of summer tax resolution.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, seconded by Mr. Johnson for the consent agenda. And we can go ahead. Is there anybody who wishes to remove any items from this agenda? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and vote. We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mr. Johnson for the consent agenda. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 6, business matters. And we have 6A, the approval of purchase of playground structure for Roosevelt ASD program. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Frank?
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of elementary playground equipment for Rosedale Elementary ASD Center Program from Kid Stuff Play Systems in care of Kennedy Recreation, Clinton Township, Michigan, in the amount of $209,700, which includes contingency, and authorize the superintendent or her designee to negotiate and execute final contracts on behalf of the Board of Education.
Support.
President Bradford, I think she said Rosedale, just in
Okay.
case we should, and it's Roosevelt.
Okay.
So
I'll
just
reread
in
it.
case, I think we should read
Okay,
it
would you
one more
please
time.
reread
Yes.
the motion, please?
I thought you were going to say I said the money wrong. I did have to say that. So just start all over.
You
Emily,
kinda
can you
did that
rewind?
one too, but that's okay.
Okay,
All
I'll
right,
try it
here we
again. Okay. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of the elementary playground equipment for Roosevelt Elementary ASD Center Program from Kid Stuff Play Systems in care of Kennedy Recreation, Clinton Township, Michigan, in the amount of $209,700, which includes contingency, and authorize the superintendent or her designee to negotiate and execute final contracts on behalf of the Board of Education.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of purchase of playground structure for Roosevelt ASD program. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mr. Francis.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I know that this was discussed at length at the study session and the committee of the whole. I apologize for not being there, but I watched that portion, and it was done so much better than I ever could have done it. So I thank Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Sproul for that. This is a purchase, as mentioned, for Roosevelt's ASD Center Program. It's from our, this isn't capital projects, this is Act 18, right? So I have that note in here as capital projects, but it's actually from the Act 18 budget.
Okay.
It's not in the resolution, so it's not a huge concern. So we are purchasing this, as was discussed at the committee of the whole, for the students that are in that program. Some are as young as 3 years of age. It's a play structure for them, and it's fenced in, and I know you had this conversation already, but just for folks who haven't, it's fenced in more for allowing the students to be safe in that area. We do have students that might, as we use the word, elope, or might wander off. So, and it's also very overstimulating for many of these students to use the play structure with all of the other students that are on them. So this is an excellent use of the Act 18 dollars that we have. It's exactly why we get these dollars. So we'll be putting this in when the weather becomes more appropriate in the springtime, and we can actually start doing that type of digging. I did put a 3% contingency in here, just in case. You never know if there's a drainage issue below where we're going to put this in or anything like that. So I just wanted to have a few dollars on tap for that, just in case we have an issue.
Okay, great. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Burton?
Just to follow up on what Mr. Francis had said, we use Act 18 frequently. We know what that means. Those are dollars from the state of Michigan that have got to be used specifically for our special education programs.
Yes,
Just,
correct.
and that is the funding that this is coming out of.
Yes. Apologies for the
No, that's okay.
on the document.
That's okay. Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of purchase of playground structure for Roosevelt ASD. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 6B, the approval of summer 2024 bond contingency. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the recommendation from the owner's representative, Plant Moran Real Point, for $150,000 in additional project contingency costs for summer 2024 renovation projects for a total contingency amount of $1,275,731.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. For Mrs. Jarvis? Oh, sorry, Mrs. Jarvis. Boy, we're having language issues this evening. We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield, for the approval of summer 2024 bond contingency. May I, would you call the roll, please? No, may I have a motion?
No discussion.
Oh, good Lord in heaven. Okay, Mr. Francis is going to speak, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Bradford. I know that, again, this was discussed at length at the Committee of the Whole. The $150,000 in additional project contingency is for what we just had completed in the summer of 2024, as we're calling it, the 24 bond contingency. Just for those just to catch up, anybody who's jumping in and didn't see anything from the Committee of the Whole, we had some unforeseen items in the projects, and they were billed relatively late. I know Mr. Weber talked about how we are trying to set something up with Clark Construction to make sure we clean that up and not have these types of issues again next year. And on top of that, we believe that the one or two of the biggest dollar items that are coming potentially towards us, we don't really completely agree with it being an issue. We talked about, I think, in the meeting, the plumbing issue, and there's some other things. So we also have those dollars covered by other dollars that are coming back to us from other contingencies. And as a point of emphasis, this is not money that isn't already allocated, nor is it over budget. This is really the requirements of the ability to swap dollars around. We need the board's approval, because at one point we asked this board for a specific dollar amount of contingency for the specific projects of the summer of 2024. And so we need the board's approval to make these moves with the dollars moving from over here to over here. So there really, it was, I think, watching what was discussed last week at the Committee of the Whole was an excellent explanation, and I think just a summation of what was talked about.
Do we have any questions or comments? Mrs. Frank?
To reiterate what he said, is when we're moving the numbers, we're moving money. It's moving from the 2024 bond contingency to different 2024. It's not moving within classrooms to bond money, correct?
Correct. But just to be very, very clear, some of it is, for example, there's a little bit of money left from the LCTC robotics. That's still bond dollars, but it was a different project. We have some money coming back from the moving of Jackson ECC, the movers that we hired. Again, allocated bond dollars from the 2021 bond initiative, but not specific to this. So those dollars are all wrapped up in the bond. This isn't dollars that go to staff for payroll. This isn't to buy items for students. This is all bond dollars. We're just reallocating from this bucket over to the other bucket.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield, for the approval of summer 2024 bond contingency. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes.
Now we're
Mrs.
ready.
Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 6C, approval of HVAC repair at Stevenson. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Burton?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve funding for the repairs of HVAC equipment at Stevenson High School, including parts and labor from Systemp Corporation located in Rochester Hills, Michigan, for a cost of $61,617, which includes 3% contingency.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of HVAC repair at Stevenson, and we're going to hear from Mr. Francis.
Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
This is a repair, and again, Brian Weber did an excellent job of describing this, but just a quick summation. At Stevenson, these are chillers. This is air conditioning only. These are old units that we, at some point in the future, will be working to replace. This is going to make sure that they're repaired and working, and there's quite a bit of a lead time on this, so we wanted to start now so we can have it ready for the cooling season. So this should not affect, as long as the parts come in as they had stated and the work gets done as they've stated thus far, we should have those repaired and ready for the cooling season when we get into, never know what this weather in Michigan is doing anymore, but what I believe to be the traditional cooling season
Yes.
would be ready for. This also will get those chillers working properly and give us enough life until down the road a little bit, whether that be a bond project or a large sinking fund project, but to have the time to gather those dollars and to lay out that project to replace them. It's going to be a much more expensive item and a heavier lift than this repair, but this repair is needed at this time to get us going.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of HVAC repair at Stevenson. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Gladly. Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and we have a motion, or we have a, yeah, we have a motion. Motion passes. My goodness. All right, moving on to item 6D, the approval of additional funding for the Holland bus purchase. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mr. Johnson.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve additional funding for the purchase of Bluebird school buses from Holland Bus Company, Holland, Michigan, in the amount of $5,352.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of additional funding for Holland bus purchase, and we're going to hear from Mr. Francis.
Thank you again.
Yep.
This is truly a cleanup item that was an honest mistake by the Holland Bus Company with their quote. I know that Mrs. Smith explained that they left out, they accidentally removed all the seats in the bus when they quoted it out. I took the phone call from the gentleman. He was literally beside himself. And we said, if that's what it was supposed to cost, then that's what it was supposed to cost all along. So we will pay for the thing that we are receiving. So this is out of the 2021 bond. The original approved amount by the board was $625,675 for 6 different buses. This will just allow us to raise that PO, that purchase order amount, to $631,027 so we can have fully board-approved funds for those buses. They weren't going to be manufactured into their 2026 model years. They're probably not going to get started until February or March anyway. There's no delay. This isn't causing any concern with the buses. This is just us squaring it up properly to pay what we really owed.
Great, thank you.
You're
Any questions or comments? Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that it sounds odd to think of why we would order a bus with no seats. In fact, we ordered a bus with fewer than the number of seats on a full bus because of, to accommodate wheelchairs.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So there would have had to have been some seats removed, but they inadvertently put down no seats.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, President Bradford. And just to confirm, Mr. Francis, this is out of the 2021 bond.
This is the 2021 bond fund initiative, yes. And we're just we were always planning to buy buses through that. The board approved the original in September for the 2021 bond to pay for it. So we want to keep that consistent and get the extra $5,352 out of bond as well. Again, we're just truing up the purchase order to make it right.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of additional funding for Holland bus purchase. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 6E, approval of the 2024-2025 budget amendment. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the attached amended budgets for the 24-25 school year. General Fund, Funded Projects Fund, Special Education Fund, Debt Retirement Fund, 2023 Bond Fund, Sinking Fund, Capital Projects Fund, Food Services Fund, Health and Welfare Fund, Scholarship Fund, and the School Activities Fund.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the approval of the 2024-2025 budget amendment. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Allison Smith.
Thank you, President Bradford, and thank you to the board. I appreciate you all willing to take time to go over in detail our budgets as we did during our committee of the whole meeting last week. As the motion said, we've got 11 different funds that we use to keep track of our resources and how we spend those resources. The largest one, of course, is our general fund. So I went over a number of adjustments. Primarily what we're seeing in this first amendment is adjustments due to changes in the retirement funding. And now that we have those funds, now that we've received the first payments, we know what those are going to be this year. So in our originally adopted budget, we were estimating revenues of $175.6 million, and I've increased that by $7.5 million. Again, primarily due to the retirement funding, bringing our new projected revenue up to $183.2 million. On the expenditure side, our original budget included expenditures of $177.1 million, and we're adjusting that by $8.5 million, bringing projected costs to $185.6 million, which leaves us with an ending fund balance of $30.9 million, or 16.7%, so still well within the recommended 15 to 20% range. The adjustments on the expenditure side also correlate with that adjustment on the retirement funding. Much of the retirement funding that we receive is just a flow through from the state to the Office of Retirement Services, so when they give us funds, then we need to record those expenditures on our ledger and then pass the payment on to the state. So that largely captures the adjustments here. The other adjustment of note that we discussed during the committee meeting was an adjustment to the transfers line. In our proposed budget, we included a $500,000 transfer to the Capital Projects Fund to help pay for some of the projects that we want to tackle that were not covered in either our sinking fund or through our bond. And we recognize that last year we had some one-time grant funds that we were able to shift general fund expenditures off of the general fund temporarily, which allowed us some additional funds in our fund balance that would make this decision for us to move funds over to the Capital Projects Fund to try to align one-time revenues with one-time expenditures. So I've gone ahead and made that adjustment. The rest of the funds are primarily an update to the beginning fund balance. Now that we know how much money we had to start the year off, I've gone ahead and updated those funds. And the only exception to that was the Capital Projects Fund that we were just talking about, the transfer. I did update the transfers in line to reflect $1 million transfer from the general fund, and then also bumped up expenditures to $3.5 million to properly allocate funds for projects that are currently in the works. The only other item of note, I believe, actually, I think that was all of the things that we covered. Oh, and I did want to mention grants. From last week, we went over the different grants that the district receives. Grants are dollars in are dollars out, so the revenue always equals the expenditures. And we had some additional information available to us in the course of the week, so I wanted to get the most up-to-date numbers before you tonight. So that was what was included in your board packet and what's online for our community. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. We appreciate that update. Are there any questions or comments? All right, seeing none. We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the approval of the 2024-2025 budget amendment. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 7, instruction matters. We do not have any this evening, so we will move on to item 8, personnel matters. And we have 8A, teachers for approval. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and offer employment for the 2024-25 school year to the teachers listed on the attached document.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the teachers for approval. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mr. Abate.
Yes, hello, thank you. The new staff members we are presenting fill instructional needs in elementary, secondary, and special education. They're all very well qualified to fill their respective positions, and we are confident they will perform at a high level and represent LPS in a manner that is consistent with our shared vision and collective commitments. These positions have also been included in the 24-25 budget. We are pleased to be recommending these talented professionals to join our LPS family, and with your approval, we're excited to have them working with our students.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. Any questions or comments? Alrighty, we have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank, for teachers for approval. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford,
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 8B, teachers for tenure. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Frank.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and acknowledge that tenure status has been granted to the following teacher, effective on the respective date. Melissa Brown, December 5th, 2024.
support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for teacher for tenure. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats.
Hello again. Our teacher for tenure on this agenda has successfully completed the district's requirements for probationary teachers, including years of service, evaluations of overall performance, and documentation of student growth. We have carefully reviewed all supporting materials along with the recommendation of our school administration and have verified that she should be granted tenure status with Livonia Public Schools. We wish to offer our congratulations for reaching this milestone and look forward to many successful years in LPS.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Sounds great. We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for teacher for tenure. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
President Bradford,
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 8C, resignations. That is for board information only. So we will go on to item 8D, retirements. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation for services rendered by Lisa Harden and Elizabeth McCann.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield, for retirements. This evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats.
Thank you again. Tonight, we honor and congratulate two members of our LPS family who are retiring from their positions with Livonia Public Schools. As they leave the district, they take with them a combined total of 31 years of service. On behalf of the administration, I would like to thank our retirees for the dedication and the service they've provided the students of LPS, and we ask the board to please adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Congratulations and happy retirement. Of course. All right. We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield, for retirements. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
yes. Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford,
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 9, hearing from board members. Item 9A, second reading board policy IFE, field trips. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Burton?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy IFE field trips.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the second reading Board Policy IFE field trips. And Mr. Green, hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Ms. Bonifield, congratulations. It was 16 years ago we were chaperones at the Detroit Zoo, speaking of field trips. That was a fun time. I don't know where the time went. There have been no changes since our first reading of this policy, so we're ready to move forward.
All righty. Any questions or comments? No. The field trip shall go on.
President Bradford, I just want to say, I really do.
Oh,
Did you
Mrs.
call?
Frank.
I think that field trips are such a great enhancement to our educational system. I love that we're looking at our policies to make sure that we are able to continue to provide these for our students. So I just wanted to get that plug in there for field trips. Clearly, it's a benefit to parents as well as a chaperone.
Yes, thank you for that, because, yes, field trips are always fun, so I'm glad we are still able to provide field trips for our students, so that's great. All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the second reading of Board Policy IFE field trips. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 9B, hearing from board members. This is usually done at the prior to the end of our meeting. If anybody has anything that they wishes to share with the board and the community, it's open for that right now. Would anybody wish to say something? Okay.
Okay.
Mrs. Frank, would you like to say something?
I just wanted to say that we all miss our fearless leader tonight, that Mrs. Oquist was unable to make it, and Mr. Francis, you did a fantastic job, but we always miss Andrea, and our thoughts and prayers are with her and her family, and we miss her at the board table greatly. So I just wanted to send our love to her.
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Frank. Oh, we all send our love to the Oquist family this evening, and we do miss you. Anybody else? Mrs. Burton?
Yes, we have spoken highly, as we absolutely wanted to, about Mrs. Bonifield earlier in the meeting. We will miss you very much going forward. We look forward to the fact that we'll see you all around continually still. I would also like to take a moment, though, to welcome preemptively here for a moment Dave McFarland, who is in our audience. Those of you at home can't see him, but we look forward to you joining us at the table, Dave. We would look forward to your breadth of experience in the community already, your experience with having two little ones who are just going to be entering Livonia Public Schools, so that is very exciting for us. And I would like to thank the community of voters who came out to support school board candidates and to look at candidates very seriously and very thoroughly. There were 5 candidates vying for 4 seats. And I would like to just thank our community for taking this very seriously. Elections are nothing to ignore. They're important, and in something as local as a school board election, sometimes just a few votes makes an enormous difference. So thank you to the citizens of Livonia who paid enough attention to school board members to come out and vote for that, because we believe, obviously, sitting at this table, that it's very important. And we look forward very much, Dave, in January to welcoming you to the table.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, President Bradford. And to follow up on that, I want to let the community know that Mr. McFarland has been attending our meetings regularly for months. It's not like he's just here tonight to step into the shoes of Mrs. Bonifield. But he's been very engaged for many months. And we appreciate your willingness to do that, Dave. It showed your dedication and your desire to become part of this team. And it is a team, and I'm talking about everybody in this room, not just the 7 of us sitting at the board table, but the board and the cabinet. It's amazing how quickly this calendar year has gone. They seem to go faster and faster. And everybody worked very, very hard this year. And I just want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays, and be safe, and we'll see you all next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Bonnefield.
Just to continue with that thought.
Mrs. Jarvis, okay. Mrs.
You don't get to
Jarvis.
talk yet, Tammy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to continue with that thought, I just wanted to extend the best holiday wishes to everyone in our community. No matter how you and your family celebrate, our thoughts and warm wishes are with you for a happy, healthy, and joyful holiday season.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Mrs. Bonnefield.
I just wanted to take a chance to thank everyone for all the kind words, all the support that I've had over the years. I've gone through some very difficult times, and y'all have been there for me. And I just want to say I think Colleen, really hit it on the head, and you guys have been talking about it. We're a team. And there's not one person on the team there's no I in team. And that's what's made it such a great experience, is all the board members, all the cabinet members, all the superintendents, every person that works for LPS is part of that team. And it's just been a really great experience. And again, thank you for the kind words, and thank you for the 12 years. It's been a great experience, and I'm not going far, so don't worry about it.
You know where to find you. Yes, we definitely do. Mr. Johnson.
Just another thought, and Tammy said, we've been here for you. We will always be here for you.
Thank you.
Very true, very true. Well, on that note, I also want to wish everybody a very happy holiday, Merry Christmas, and just like Liz said, however you celebrate, be safe and enjoy your break, your holiday break. And boy, we'll be back in January. We have a lot of things to do from January to June here. So we hope that you have a lovely holiday, and Merry Christmas. And we're done. We're adjourned for this evening. So have a great evening. Thank you so much.